Hello, welcome to episode 6 of How to Win a World Cup. In this one, we're going to look at thinking correctly under pressure. I'm going to take you back to Sydney, the 22nd of November, to the World Cup final. England against Australia, and it's come down to the last few seconds of extra time. The scores are level at 17 all. One rush decision now, one head that goes, and it's over. And this is the moment to watch, because it's the whole of this episode in a single passage of play. England win the ball back, and instead of panicking, 15 exhausted men calmly work through a routine. The forwards drive, Matt Dawson darts, Martin Johnson takes it up one more time to buy a single yard, and then the ball goes back to Jonny Wilkinson, who, with his weaker right foot, drops a goal out of the Sydney night and wins England the World Cup. The kick looks like a flash of magic, but it was rehearsed. The move was rehearsed, kicking under pressure was rehearsed, and most importantly of all, thinking clearly under pressure was rehearsed. And that's why England kept their heads when everything was on the line, while a whole stadium lost theirs. Clive Woodward called thinking under pressure Teacup, and it's the 6th chapter in How You Win a World Cup. Teacup stands for thinking correctly under pressure, and the key word, Clive always insisted, was correctly, because everyone knows you're supposed to stay calm in a big moment. That's not the insight. The insight is how on earth you actually get there, and his answer was the opposite of what you might think. It was not a pep talk, it was not deep breathing, it was preparation. So total and so obsessive, but by the time the pressure arrived, the team had already lived it in their heads dozens of times over. Clive built what he called a war room, and he would stand his players and coaches in it and fire situations at them against the clock. You're 6 points down with 2 minutes left and a man in the sin bin. What do? The kicker is injured. Who steps up? Role play, he said, after role play after role play. Work through every eventuality until nothing that happens on the day can take you by surprise. And if that rings a bell, it should. Remember the Royal Marines right back in the second film and their phrase, dislocated expectations. The plan will fall apart, so train for the falling apart. Teacup is the very same idea, taken onto the rugby pitch and drilled until it's second nature. In many ways, you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your preparation, so prepare until that level is exceedingly high. Now, no one on earth understood that better than the man who struck the kick that won the World Cup. Because in his own mind, Jonny Wilkinson had kicked the winning goal in a World Cup thousands of times before he ever did it for real. And at the end of every single practice session, he would stand over the ball and imagine the entire tournament hung on this one kick. And he would not leave the training pitch until he had slotted hundreds of them in a row perfectly. By his own admission, the obsession took him to the very edges of a breakdown. He worked with a remarkable kicking coach called Dave Allred, a man with a doctorate in performing under pressure, who taught him to fix his eyes on one precise target and build a routine so identical every time that the body simply knew what to do. So when the real moment came in Sydney, with 26 seconds left and a nation holding its breath, something extraordinary happened. Wilkinson has described it since, and it gives me goosebumps every time. It's not me kicking, it's a knowing of it, he said. He had rehearsed the fear so many times that in the one moment it mattered most, there was no fear left, just a knowing. That's what Teacup buys you, not the absence of pressure, but a head so well prepared that it stays clear while everyone else is spinning. Now, if thinking clearly under pressure is the lesson, there's no crueler place on earth to test it than the single most frightening moment in English sport, the penalty shootout in football. You know the history. For 30 years, England and penalties were a national tragedy played on loop. Italia 90, Euro 96, and a young defender called Gareth Southgate, of whom we'll hear a lot more in a moment. 1998, 2004, 2006, again and again, the best players in the country would walk up in front of the entire world and miss. We told ourselves it was a lottery, bad luck, just one of those things. But it wasn't. And here's where it gets fascinating, because a Norwegian professor named Geir Jorder sat down and studied it properly, and what he found was uncomfortable. It wasn't luck at all. England missed because of how England behaved in the moment. Of all the great footballing nations, he found England had the very worst record, and also, tellingly, the fastest. The shortest time of anyone between the referee's whistle and the kick. England players were frightened, desperate to get the ordeal over with, and rushed, snatching at it. Some of them were even turning their backs on the goalkeeper and hurrying away from the ball, the body trying to flee a moment the mind could not bear. In other words, the exact opposite of everything Wilkinson did. Where he had slowed it down to a knowing, England's footballs were speeding it up in a panic. So England finally did something they had never properly done before. They decided to treat penalties not as a lottery to be feared, but as a skill to be owned, exactly as Woodward would have. They studied that science. They practiced deliberately, taking their time. They had players walking the long, lonely walk to the halfway line in training over and over so that one day it would feel familiar. They worked out each man's own routine and drilled it so that under pressure the body had something to fall back on. They taught their players to breathe, to face the goalkeeper rather than flee him, to slow the whole thing down and take control of it, instead of letting the fear take control of them. And the man leading it all, the man asking his players to walk up and hold their nerve, was Gareth Southgate, the very same Southgate who in 1996 at Wembley in a semi-final had taken a penalty for England and missed it, and then carried the blame for 22 long years. Who better to teach a young team to face the worst moment imaginable than the one man who had already lived it and survived it? And so we come to Moscow, 3rd of July 2018, a World Cup second round, England against Colombia. England lead through a Harry Kane penalty right until the dying seconds when Colombia equalise, and that old familiar feeling of dread settles over every England supporter alive. Extra time decides nothing, and it goes to penalties. Of course it does. But this time something was different. This time the team had done the work. They had rehearsed the terror out of it, and one by one England's players walked up, took their time and held their nerves. Their goalkeeper, Jordan Pickford, flung himself across to save from Carlos Bacca, and then a young man named Eric Dier stepped up, calm as you like, and scored. And England won a World Cup penalty shootout, the first one ever after 30 years of heartbreak. And what did Gareth Southgate say afterwards, this man who had missed in 96 and waited 22 years to feel this? He said he hoped it would give belief to the generation of players that followed. He had taken the most painful thing in English football and the most painful thing in his own life, and he thought correctly under pressure and rebuilt it. And there it is again, the same truth in two different sports 20 years apart. A rugby fly half rehearsing one kick until the moment held no fear for him. A football team taking the most frightening 90 seconds in sport and drilling it until they could walk up and simply breathe. Neither of them had found a way to remove the pressure, because no one can. What they did was prepare so completely that when the pressure came, they had a clear head while they were standing there ready to do the job. That is thinking correctly under pressure, and it's one of the truest things I know about winning anything at all. So this has been the 6th chapter in How You Win a World Cup. The big moment is precisely when most people's thinking falls apart, so the whole job is making sure yours doesn't. You do not rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your preparation, so prepare relentlessly and live the hard moment in your mind long before it ever arrives. Slow down. Almost everyone who chokes does the very same thing. They rush, they snatch, they try to escape the fear. The calm ones take their time and they take control. Rehearse the terror until it turns ordinary. A kick taken 10,000 times, a lonely walk from the halfway line, practice in an empty stadium. Make the frightening thing familiar. And if you lead, go first, into the very fear you're asking others to face, because the person who has survived the worst moment is the one who can teach it. Two teams, two sports, the same lonely walk in the same unbearable pressure, and both of them found the way through it was never courage in the moment, it was the work done quietly long before. Next time, the strangest secret in the whole of the series, because when England footballers set out to crack those penalties, do you know where they went looking for an answer? Not to football. They hired an economist. It turns out the very best winners, in any field you can name, all share one slightly shameless habit. They will steal a good idea from absolutely anyone, anywhere. Next time we'll meet the magpies. I'll see you then.